Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 290 of CryptoBiography, and it is a story done in one episode. It's called Beneath Buttonhook Bay, and here we go. "Where are you going?" her mom asked as she ran out the door. "The beach," Cassie replied, trailing her uninflated blow-up raft behind her head like a veil. "Buttonhook Bay," she added when she was out of the house completely, knowing her mother wouldn't like it. It was only a few blocks, and she ran most of the way. All she wanted was to get out on the water. When her feet hit sand, she slowed and started blowing up her raft, even while she walked. She kicked off her flip-flops and then stopped just before the water and finished blowing up her raft. The beach was not quite on Buttonhook Bay, but was near it. She ran out into the water, tossed the raft out, and leapt on it. The pillow trailing behind her, she started paddling with her arms. The waves were remarkably small on this day, but she was glad to see it. She wasn't on a board, and she wasn't looking to do any kind of surfing. She just wanted to float around. She paddled out past the mild breakers, then around the cliff towards Buttonhook Bay. The bay was narrow and did form a hook shape. It was like a watery maze, only a few dozen yards across at its mouth. It narrowed only slowly, but the cliffs towering above gave a strange sense of distance, both too close and too far. She had never actually been in the bay before. She had often thought of doing it, but every time she had even gone out far enough to see the entrance, a fear overtook her and she paddled the other direction. When she thought about it, she'd never had proof that anyone she knew had actually gone in there. Oh, people had said they'd gone in there, but thinking back, she'd never seen them on the way to or from one of these journeys, and their descriptions differed in some significant ways. The only way they were the same is that the walls were high and the end of the buttonhook was completely isolated, but that would be the story. The entire area around the top was covered thickly with thorn bushes. No one had a view down into the buttonhook. Some said there was nothing there. Some said there was a cave. Some said there was a small, isolated beach. She would find out. The fear gripped her as she started towards it, but she pushed through. Her arms butterflied over and over, and she moved towards the bay. The small waves of today's ocean, she could now see, died down to an unnaturally flat surface in the walls of the bay. As she entered, the wind too died down. The sound of the ocean, already not even a roar, was now silenced. She paddled on, and noticed the strange sense of distance and size she got from outside the bay was even stronger in here. In some ways, it seemed like the huge walls inscribed the entire world, and she was a speck inside them. But in other ways, she felt that if she reached out, she might touch the walls on either side of her. Even her own paddling had no real sound to it, and it too had no sense of space or speed. She was both moving forward at a rapid, even frightening pace, while also nearly staying still. But at some point, she found herself at the turn at the far end of the buttonhook. The watercourse turned to the right, and then right almost immediately again, going against the direction she had been recently paddling. She made the first turn, and then as she made the second, she looked down to the end of the bay. Here, no part of the open ocean could be seen. There were no signs of people at all, no phone wires. Even the ubiquitous trash hadn't seemed to have made its way into this waterway. The end, though it couldn't really be far away, seemed far enough. She couldn't tell if there was a beach there or not. If there was something there, some trick of the light or of the rocks where they met the water's glassy surface hid it from her. She paddled again and was struck by a deep sense of being alone. No one was here. Perhaps she was the only one who had ever been here. Now that she was here, she could believe that everyone who had claimed to have come here had been lying. Though part of her felt that the ocean should be a bit warmer here, it was not. Her arms were dipping into icy water with every stroke. With the high cliffs above blocking direct sunlight, she felt the skin on her arms, shoulders, and upper back go to goose flesh. It seemed to numb her mind as well. Soon the end of the buttonhook was right in front of her. She put her arms in the water and held them still to slow her raft. It slowed, and then, just barely, bumped into the rock with a plastic scratching sound. It sounded loud in the immense quiet. The raft squeezed slightly and then barely rebounded back. Her raft stopped a bare arm's length from the cliff. The few ripples that the raft had created were already gone, as though the water were made of treacle. She looked up at the cliff above her. It formed a U-shape, the sky a narrow rod of light. Her eyes followed the cliff down, until she was looking at the surface of the water and then below. When she'd been paddling, she hadn't noticed the clarity of the water due to her own splashings and the need to keep her head low to keep from tiring out her back and neck. But the water was as clear as glass. She looked over the edge of her raft and kept looking down. The water seemed to have no end to its depth here. She couldn't see the bottom. It only faded into obscurity from lack of light. She was seized by a great fear, the fear that can only come from knowing there is an immense, unknown space directly below you. She hugged her raft and squeezed her eyes closed. But no, some small, rational part of her mind thought, it's just a lot of water, nothing to really be afraid of. She forced herself to open her eyes. With the side of her face pressed against the raft, she could only see the raft and the cliff. She raised her head up and made herself look over the edge. Below was water, and the cliff indicating exactly how far down it went, further than the height of a skyscraper, into a depth she could only find herself getting lost in. And then, just as she was struggling out of her renewed fear, she saw something else. Movement. Deep below her, something was moving. She couldn't tell its size or distance or its exact shape, but it was moving and growing larger. Closer. Cassie didn't even scream. She paddled, turning her raft back up the waterway. It was so far. She tried not to think what might be below her. Shark? Orca? Something worse? Then she found that despite her paddling, she was no longer moving forward. Something was holding her raft. She immediately pulled her arms and legs up out of the water, taking on a fetal position. She closed her eyes. She felt something, then several things, pulling at the edges of her raft. Then they touched her skin, cold, slimy, and revolting. Several hours later, Cassie's mother heard a scratching on the front door. The evening had just turned to night when she opened the door. Cassie was there, or so she thought, but it was some trick of the light. A mass of sea creatures in vague human form was on the stoop. It held Cassie's raft over itself like a mantle. It even wore her bathing suit. But then it collapsed, and Cassie's mother saw what it really was and screamed. And the combination of creatures slithered out of Cassie's suit and from under her raft and crawled away towards the ocean, a mass of tentacles, shells, and eyes, to bury itself in the endless depths below Buttonhook Bay. And that's the story for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously, this was, sort of Cthulhu mythos, Lovecraftian. It's an interesting subgenre, and it's one that I think needs to be sort of taken away from the rather racist roots that it started with, which some people have done already. There's been some interesting stories, and also the recent show, and so it's nice to see that can happen. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to write. I actually started this week writing a different story, but I just couldn't quite make it work or figure out exactly how I wanted the direction to go. So I needed to do something else, and somehow this just sort of came out of my imagination. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, or Mastodon. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.